Please be seated. Thank you very much for being here. We always enjoy you coming by. So I just hope you feel welcome. Before we open up for questions, let me just say that we all recognize we're coming down the home stretch. We have 7.5 working days, at least calendared. I guess they could work on Saturday and Sunday, although it's been pretty rare that that's happened. But I feel good about the session. I think there's been a lot of work done in a pretty non-contentious way. It's been a lot more harmonious, I think, this session, and I appreciate that. The budget is coming together. As you know, my number one budget priority is education, and I think we'll find that the bulk of the monies, particularly the new money, is going to be spent in education. I've asked for $422 million, and I think we're going to get close to that, my hope. It may not all be in the WPU, like I've suggested, which gives more flexibility to the local school districts, but I think you'll find that the numbers, the total amount of money being spent on education will be very close to our recommendation. And probably some money directed in more of a mandated way to the local governments, or excuse me, the local school districts on technology, but with flexibility of how to, in fact, spend that money. So there's going to be more flexibility to the local school districts with the technology amounts of money. But I feel good. Crescendo time now. The intensity will increase. More bills will be flushed through and hopefully debated appropriately so we don't have any unintended consequence. That's always the worry. But I think you're going to find that the pace will accelerate over these next 7.5 days. With that, what's on your mind?
Governor, what's your takeaway on the public outcry over the shooting that happened on Saturday?
Well, it's a local police issue, Salt Lake City Police. We had opportunity to be there to help with backup. We have a special unit designed to help with those kinds of things and to make sure we don't get unruly mobs and the associated problems that happen with that. I think there is warranted an investigation to find out exactly what the cause is and whether the police acted appropriately. So I will wait for that investigation before I pass judgment on anybody, but I think it needs to have an investigation. I think that's taking place, and we'll assist as a state any way that we can, but it really is a Salt Lake City police issue.
With the eyes of the country on Salt Lake City regarding this, are you concerned about people coming here and building on the protests we saw last night?
Well, again, I think Utah has got a great track record. We have our crime rate in Utah is about 40% lower than the national average. In the Intermountain region, it's 43% lower, and that's on violent crime. So if you're going to come to a state that you're going to feel safe, Utah's got to be at the top of the list. So again, we have every crime that happens anywhere in the country here in Utah. We just don't have it in the abundance and the volume that we find other places. So I'm not worried about that. I think people know they can come to Utah and feel safe and welcome, and we're looking forward to have them come to Utah.
Do you think the camera footage should be released?
I don't know all the ins and outs of the legal aspects of that. I expect that it will at some time. I think there's an ongoing investigation, and there may be, in fact, some charges brought. So it's probably appropriate to keep that not in the public domain for some period of time, and let's let the process roll out. I expect it will be made public at some time in the future, as it should be. But I don't want to prejudice the investigation either. There needs to be an independent review of this, and so they can make appropriate adjustments as is necessary.
Governor, the House Committee passed Representative Dunnigan's Medicaid bill that uses traditional Medicaid as opposed to Medicaid expansion. Talked a little bit about this before. There's a lot of support now from Democratic leaders in Salt Lake and others for going forward with this as the best the state can do. Is this the best the state can do, and do you support the bill as it stands?
Well, I think people are coming together, and that's the good news. The fact that we've encouraged people to come together and let's do something. And so we're doing something that I think is going to help with those who are most vulnerable in our society, the poorest of the poor. And that's a positive thing. So I applaud their efforts. It's out of committee. It needs to pass the House and then be delivered to the Senate. So I appreciate the fact that people have come together, and I think and hope that we're going to get something done.
But is that the best the state
no matter how good we are, and we are a very good state, and doing some outstanding things, there's always room for improvement.
Those who support the bill, there seem to be kind of two camps at this point, those who are calling this an important first step, and those who are saying that this might be the end of it. I believe the speaker actually called this a generational decision, implying that this issue won't come up again in any time this bill passes. Do you view it in either one of those contexts?
You know, I think it's always imperative that we review all of our policies. It wouldn't be just this one. We have opportunity to review what we're doing and how we're doing many things. And that's appropriate. That's why we have a legislative session every year. We don't just set it and forget it. We come back and review and see if there's ways to make things better. Elections will have a significant impact on what happens with the Affordable Care Act, and whether we can get more flexibility from Washington, D.C. You know, there is a hope that we can have more flexibility where we can have maybe a 90-10 split, but only have to increase our Medicaid up to 100% rather than to 138, and have people over 100% going to the federal exchange. So there's more than one way to kind of skin the cat, and I think we all will be looking appropriately to see what happens with the elections, what could be amended on the Affordable Care Act. Even Democrats agree that the Affordable Care Act can be improved, modified, and made better. Republicans have been talking about repeal and replace. Well, replace with what? It might be the modified, improved, and better system. So there might be, with good leadership in Washington, D.C., and particularly in the White House, an ability to resolve some of the differences and make it better, which would impact maybe what we do here in Utah.
The Senate is expected to take up Senator Herbert's bill to abolish the death penalty. What have you said on that?
I've said before, and you've heard me say it, that capital punishment, if we have it here in Utah, ought to be done for the most heinous crimes. It ought to be very infrequent, and that's really how we've applied the death penalty in Utah. It doesn't happen very often, and it's for the most egregious crimes out there. And I think that's where Utah's at. I think how we've done it's been good. I think, for me, the concern I have is really the lack of timeliness from the time that we end up having somebody charged until they're convicted and the punishment has been executed. So I think that we need to certainly work on having it in a more timely fashion. And I'll wait and see what comes from the legislature. I think how we've done it in the past has been really pretty good. I'd like to shorten the time frame. I also know that it's created some problems because we've not been able to get the medications, you know, to actually do the executions as we think that ought to be done in a humane way. And consequently, we've had this fallback position of a firing squad. So I think the discussion is timely and I think worthwhile, and I'll wait to see what comes from the legislature before I make an ultimate decision on it. But for me, capital punishment is, if it's going to be appropriate, should be done very infrequently for the most heinous of crimes.
Your office has indicated, Governor, that you have some background on the situation that Senator Adams rolled out last night regarding yet another effort to finance the expansion of the Port of Oakland and access coal markets, I guess. I mean, primarily coal markets and some other commodities that we might be able to ship from the state of Utah. But given the fact that in their February city council meeting, they pretty much flatly rejected this, and the mayor of Oakland has said that she's not ready to be receiving any coal shipments through the city, and the longshoremen have also kind of stacked up against this. How realistic is this?
Well, there's a number of complications, as you've pointed out. One is it's disappointing to me that any state thinks they can stop commerce. I mean, if you happen to be a state on the coast, to stop us the ability, it's not just Utah, but Wyoming and other states like Oklahoma, even West Virginia on the more east coast, to stop them from exporting their natural resources, including coal, is disappointing, because we need to have access to the ports. And the fact that you don't like it should not stop us from doing what we think is in the best interest of the people of Utah. So having access to a portal, you can see why that's important. That's why the discussion is happening, because we have others who are saying, well, we don't like it, so we're going to punish a neighboring state. That isn't right. And it's not just coal. It's any of our exports. It could be natural extractive industry. It could be other commodities besides coal. It could be foodstuffs. It could be our cattle, our turkeys. I mean, it's milk. I mean, there's all kinds of agriculture products that we export. And yet having a portal where we can know that it's always open and we can export not only what Utah needs or maybe what Wyoming and other neighboring states need is probably a good economic position to be in.
Longshoremen indicated though that these were all low-value cargoes, and they were implying that they probably were looking for another container terminal that would take higher value cargo. Again, we just want to know if this is a realistic.
Yeah, I'm a free market person. I believe the free market ought to be allowed to perform and do what the market does. And whatever the market demands are, whether they want to have more coal, less coal, more natural gas, more livestock, whatever we want to export, the market should make that determination, not a union someplace that says we want to and make sure our wages are higher, even if they're being made higher artificially. Let's let the free market work. That's what's made America great. That's what we stand for in Utah, and that's what should happen on our coastal states to allow commerce to occur. And the federal government, if needs be, ought to step in and make sure that that happens.
And given that you're a free market person, how do you feel about taxpayers putting up to $51 million to fund the loans for the development of that port?
Well, we obviously where governments are controlling access points, there certainly is a role for the government to play to make sure that the free market can work. It's like having highways. We expect the highways and the transportation system to work so that goods and services can be marketed throughout the region. Well, it's the same thing with portals. And so government certainly has a role to do that. Besides that, this is an investment. This is not just an expense only. You invest $50 million and you're probably going to get back 3 or 4 or 5 to 1 return on your investment. So it's good for the taxpayer. But if we can't export our goods, that's bad for the taxpayer.
So you're okay with the taxpayers?
I'm okay with the concept of what we've got, what's being proposed. Now, we want to make sure we do it within the confines of the law and the Constitution and the statutes. So there's probably a right way to do it as opposed to a wrong way. But the concept of having free market opportunities is one that every American ought to uphold.
But shouldn't the free market be the one to give the loans back?
Yeah, except we have a government trying to stop the free market from happening.
Governor, do you think it was wise, that it was a good idea for the legislature to launch an audit of the U before USU, even though USU got $1.5 million from the legislature last year that the U hasn't gotten?
Well, that's a question you need to ask the legislature as far as what the motivation behind the audit is. I think we have audits all the time of all different government departments. Certainly my departments have been audited and continue to be audited to make sure there's accountability and how we're spending the money, that make sure that's appropriate and that we can be responsible to taxpayers. So I expect the University of Utah is no exception to that rule, but the motivation behind that's a question for the legislature that's calling for it.
You're not going to get a chance to say this, to weigh on this formally, but the House passed a joint resolution this morning on calling for a constitutional convention in the states. Do you support calling a constitutional convention in the states, and if so, what do you want to restrict it to?
Well, I understand the motivation behind calling a constitutional convention, and it's born out of frustration that Washington, D.C. is broken, that they're not getting things done, that they're not balancing the budget. The most common thing we hear about is we want an amendment to the Constitution that we can't seem to get the Congress to pass, just like we in the states have to live within our means and have requirements to have a balanced budget. That seems to be one of the drivers, if not the most important driver. The other side of that coin is there somehow going to be a runaway convention, and things that we hold near and dear as part of our Constitution we have today would be gotten away from. I think that there ought to be the ability to have controls in place so that if you had a constitutional convention, that we could protect the rights we have and enhance what we have. But that's the great debate. That is the great debate, and having one that we have control over so there's not a runaway convention, I think we have the ability to do that.
Governor, if we could go back to Medicaid, for just a moment, just to be clear, you support the concept of what the House is doing, or is that going to be a bill that you're going to be able to sign? Or that you'll need to review it?
Yeah, I'll review it, but clearly, based on what I hear, this is definitely having people come together and finding a solution. And it's making it better. So, yeah, I'm grateful for the leadership of Jim Dunnigan on this and the House. I don't want to presuppose, but I hope it passes the House. I expect it to pass the House. I expect it to go to the Senate and be passed, and I expect it to come to my desk and I'll sign it.
And there's also discussion of what some people see as complementary legislation that would require the state in 2017 with the new administration in Washington that you referred to earlier, apply again for that 90-10 waiver for those under 100%. You know, get that passed and in writing that will be done under a new administration. Is that something you support as a concept?
Well, again, my crystal ball is as foggy as anybody's. I mean, if anybody knows who's going to win the presidential election, let me know. But I expect there's going to be changes, and there will be opportunities to review where we're at and see if we can improve our position and have better policy. That ought to be a constant thing that we do in government here, certainly in the state of Utah. We're always looking for a better way to do things. We know we're not perfect now. There is room for improvement. That's a given, and we'll look to improve as we go forward. With a change in the White House, there may be opportunities to improve.
Governor Herbert, in your State of the State speech, you specifically mentioned fixing issues dealing with companies like Tesla. How satisfied are you with what the legislature's done in your college and what hasn't done?
Well, I'm still hopeful that we come to that compromise point that really keeps everybody happy. The manufacturers, the agencies, the dealerships, the manufacturers. I have a concern about a manufacturer that builds an automobile in Utah but cannot sell that product in Utah. And that needs to be fixed. Again, I'm a free market person, but I recognize that people have played by a law that's been on the books for, since the Depression years. And I don't know exactly why we have the law on the book. I just know it's on the books. And people invest a lot of money based on that law. So there needs to be an ability for us to transition from where we are at today to where we ought to be tomorrow. That maybe take 10 years or longer or shorter. But I think we need to find those steps that we need to start taking today that will in fact get us to where we want to be tomorrow. So I'm hopeful. Again, it's not just Tesla, but it's other companies out there that are having the same limitation on marketing. It's also making sure that the dealers are protected, the manufacturers out there, all working together in harmony. I know there's a significant effort. I'm hopeful that we get legislation passed this session.
Time for one more question.
Senator Backus introduced a bill fairly recently that would make it illegal for businesses to discriminate against LGBT people. I was just wondering what your opinion is about that.
I'll say that again to me. Senator Backus.
Senator Backus just introduced a new bill that would make it illegal for businesses to discriminate against LGBT people. I'm wondering what your opinion of that is. It was also introduced last year as well.
Well, probably two things come to mind. One, I thought we did a great job of bringing people together last year and respecting religious rights as well as LGBT rights and coming together in a bill that not everybody got everything they wanted, but it brought us together in ways that you don't find really in many other states. I think that was a high water mark for us in Utah of bringing in a very religious state people together and respecting people's civil rights. So I feel good about that. I'm a little nervous about anybody upsetting that apple cart. Let's try it for a few years, see how it works before we start making any improvements. Secondly, I don't think people should be discriminated against. I've always said, we ought to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And we ought not to have a law that compels us to do the right thing and be good neighbors, respect people's differences of opinion. We ought to try to do things in our lives that are not offensive to others. We ought to try not to offend others as our neighbors and our friends and our brothers and sisters here. And second, we ought not to be overly sensitive that we take offense at everything that goes on out there that maybe we don't see the same way. So let's not give offense, let's not take offense, let's love each other and get along. And we don't need to have a law that compels us to do that.
Good advice for the Super Tuesday?
Good advice for the presidential candidates and their debates and what they say about each other. So, thank you all. 7.5 days to go, but who's counting?
Next go.
Thank you,
Thank
Governor.
you all. See you.